Hello, my name is Joshua Maza, and I'm going to be telling you about Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet from a structuralist/formalist point of view while taking a look at various parts of the play from a social, political, or deeper interpretation. So, this play that Shakespeare wrote is split up into 5 acts, which are convenient for this assignment because they have 5 categories, which are exposition, dramatic incident, complication, crisis, and resolution. So, in exposition, or Act 1, you have the setting introduced in Act 1, Scene 1. This is probably the most important scene because you have 2 houses. You have the Montagues and the Capulets. They are both opposed to each other, and the play opens with these servants named Samson and Gregory of the Capulets who bite their thumb at 2 Montagues to pick a fight. So Benvolio of the Montagues, he's a kinsman for their family. He steps in with the sword drawn to stop it. But Tybalt walks in from the Capulets to stop the fight. He misunderstands Benvolio's action and a duel ensues because Benvolio did not have the intention of striking the other servants. However, Tybalt comes in thinking that, and he wants to protect his house. So they were actually gonna start dropping heads and bodies, but luckily the Prince of Verona shows up to stop the fight between the 2 families because eventually after the initial conflict, the entire family just basically shows up for some reason, and the play introduces basically most of the cast right there. The prince shows up and then he stops the conflict, and he says the next person who starts a fight is going to be sentenced to death. The first event defines the entire play. It shows the heavy political influence that the Montague and Capulets have, along with the stratification of roles. You have servants, you have kinsmen, you even have the Lord of Houses showing up just to a minor fight to protect their honor, which was a very big thing in this time. Because a minor insult, like biting your thumb, shouldn't really bother you. You can shrug that off. However, since it damages their house reputation, I believe that's why they had such a large fight about this. So you also have introduction of personalities too. You have Tybalt, who is a hothead, who completely misunderstands Benvolio, who is actually mostly a polar opposite. He is considerate and he thinks before acting. You also have, in the exposition, protagonists who are introduced. You have Romeo, who is currently depressed in a garden somewhere because his love that he can't actually love because she swore to chastity, named Rosalind. So here's the funny thing. There's a party that he only learns about because Peter, a Capulet servant, asked Romeo, who is a Montague, to read a list of invitations because Peter cannot read. Peter is an uneducated servant, which even then now explains the stratification of roles in society. So you have Peter, this uneducated servant, asking Romeo of the opposite house to help him read this list of invitations, and he sees Rosalind's name there, and that's all by fate because, honestly, who in the middle of a giant Verona city, who are you going to ask to read a list other than Romeo? Because he's a protagonist. You just got to ask the protagonist to read your list. So just by pure chance, he asks him, and he sees Rosalind's name there, and he would actually. That's pretty much the only reason he wants to go, just to see Rosalind. However, Benvolio, he is a nice cousin. He is the cousin of Romeo. He wants to try to help him get over this heartbreak because he's all depressing and mopey, and no one really likes that. So he tries to help him. He has the intention to help him forget about Rosalind by going to this party and seeing all the beautiful girls of the Verona city show up to this Capulet party. So Romeo's kind of really narrow-minded. You see this in the very first part of Scene 3 in Act 1. You see, as soon as he meets Juliet for the first time, he falls in love, and he completely forgets about Rosalind. So Benvolio did help him out. He did help him forget about Rosalind. So this leads to Romeo's character development being narrow-minded, in my opinion. But Juliet, on the other hand, at this point in time, is a little naive, but only because Lady Capulet and the nurse baby her all the time for her decisions. She doesn't really have a lot of character development at this point because she is a highly reliant character on other characters until her love for Romeo takes over, which replaces the other characters' influences. So now you have dramatic incident, or Act 2. So you have the main external problem, which is Romeo loves Juliet and Juliet loves Romeo, but Paris is about to marry Juliet because of her father Capulet, who demands that Juliet marry Paris. And Romeo is from the opposing family Montague, so they can't actually be together, because if they marry, they'll make like 20 other people upset, and Juliet can't do anything because the current society prohibits that, because women at the time do not have a lot of power, especially in Verona apparently, and marrying them will not unite the families because they are forced to cooperate instead of on their own terms. So the main problem really is just forbidden love, which ends up being stronger from human nature because you want what we can't have. Internally, it affects Romeo by making him more passionate, even to the extent of sneaking into the Capulet's garden to sit underneath Juliet's balcony. It causes him to be weak, actually, because during the strong sensation of love, it's so strong that it just melts him. And he also gains respect from Friar Lawrence because of that, because at this point of time, he is introduced into the story as an herbalist, and that is very important for later on in the story. Internally, it affects Juliet by not making her want to marry Paris, and it causes a conflict within her household because it angers Lord Capulet, because this is the only way that their family can really progress socially amongst all these stratified roles, because Paris is a guy who's like rich, he's charming, but Juliet doesn't want Paris, probably out of love for Romeo. So because of this, they are forbidden to see each other, and Juliet uses her nurse, her one and only ally, to act as the mediator between Romeo and Juliet, because Juliet is apparently confined to her house. So the two eventually become wed by Friar Lawrence, which leads to more complicated matters because it was done in secret. So now you have complication Act 3. So Act 3 opens with the death of a character. Now that Romeo is wed to Juliet, Romeo doesn't feel the need to fight Tybalt when he confronts Mercutio, Romeo, and Benvolio in the streets, who are all Montagues. So Tybalt is now his in-law. So Mercutio fights against Tybalt due to Romeo's passiveness, who then intervenes at the last moment, causing Tybalt to kill Mercutio. This abrupt change of pace to kill off a character has deeper implications, as it reminds the audience that despite Romeo and Juliet achieving marriage, doesn't mean it's recognized as a whole. So this is an extremely important point of contention, and is the main reason why the love story between Romeo and Juliet reaches its apex right here and rolls downhill. Immediately after the brawl in the streets, the Prince of Verona strolls up, and he just banishes Romeo to Mantua, as he is seen as the reason for Tybalt's actions. Although it's completely unfair, it quells the rage and keeps the peace, which is the main function of the prince in this society. So at this point of the story, there are two new problems creating complications. So you have Romeo is exiled and must flee to Mantua, and Juliet is still getting married to Paris because no one knows of their marriage. To solve the problem, Juliet consults Friar Lawrence for aid. So this brings us to Crisis, which is Act 4. Juliet is then presented with a plan from Friar Lawrence, who, with his wise and sage intentions, gives Juliet a concoction that, if used, will make it seem like she is dead for 42 hours. The intended plan was to have Juliet agree to the wedding and use it the night before, making it seem like she is dead, and Romeo will be waiting for her in the family's tomb, where she lies, and they can both escape to Mantua. So Juliet is able to kill herself and safely rest in the tomb, but in order for her to do this, she has to fully commit to her love with Romeo, because what if Friar Lawrence had actually given her real poison to stop the families in their feuding? Because if Juliet dies, then there's no point for Romeo to keep interacting with the other family, and that would stop any conflict they were having. Or what if no one ever came for her and she ended up just dying, buried alive, literally? So it starts to spill into Act 5, and I put it in Crisis Act 4 because I believe it's important to the crisis development. So, because disaster strikes in Mantua with an unpredictable plague. So this plague is the reason that Friar John, who Friar Lawrence sent to tell Romeo in Mantua, he sent Friar John to tell the plan of Juliet faking her death. However, he got quarantined from the plague, which is really unfortunate. And another unfortunate outcome was that Romeo learned of Juliet's death before knowing about the plan. So what he did was he went to go buy poison with the intention of committing suicide next to Juliet, because he believes life isn't worth living without her. So Act 4 is a crisis because everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. No one had any bad intentions, but one could say it was the work of an outside supreme force, such as God or fate. This is the point of the story where it climaxes until settling into the resolution, or Act 5. So Paris can be seen mourning at Juliet's tomb, while his watchman spots Romeo approaching, giving Paris a chance to hide and watch Romeo. They end up fighting as Paris sees Romeo as an indirect reason for Juliet's death, and it results in Romeo killing Paris because he's actually pretty weak. He just has a bunch of money and he just looks nice. So he requests to be laid next to Juliet with his dying breath. So a double suicide then takes place because Romeo finds Juliet dead when in reality she's just taking a nap and proceeds to take his dose of poison to kill himself. But then Juliet wakes up and she sees Romeo with the vial of poison in his hand, and she tries to be romantic by taking some of the poison from his lips, but she fails and just takes a dagger and stabs herself. Because if she lived, then she would just have to live with guilt for the rest of her life, because her faking her death is a reason for Romeo's death, so she can be seen as an indirect reason for killing Romeo. So it could be kind of like thought of that she killed Romeo and she can't live with that herself. And Act 5 is a resolution because it returns Verona back to its original state more or less, because the families are no longer feuding and able to live without conflict.